Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The courtroom was silent, broken only by the rustling of files and the occasional click of heels on the polished parquet floor. In the dock, a man with stooped shoulders and threadbare clothes seemed almost invisible to those around him. His face, etched by years and hardship, bore the marks of a past unknown to anyone in the room. He had arrived early that morning, pushing behind him a worn canvas bag filled with the few belongings he still possessed. The jurors' and spectators' eyes slid over him as if he were a ghost. A few hushed whispers circulated among the public, "Another homeless man, what a waste." But when the judge banged his gavel to call the case, a name echoed through the room, heavy with resonance and history: Colonel James Richardson, Iraq War veteran. At that precise moment, time seemed to stand still. The murmurs ceased, the phones were lowered, and everyone present rose, respectful and shocked. Eyes that until then had seen only a man in rags filled with a mixture of astonishment and respect. The legal system and human prejudices had just crumbled in an instant. For this man who had given so much, suffered so much, and yet been forgotten by society, this simple act of recognition would change the course of his trial and reveal truths that no one was ready to hear. James Richardson was no longer the colonel everyone once respected. The shining decorations on his military uniform now belonged to a distant, almost unreal past. Today, he lived on the streets, among cardboard boxes and the remnants of sidewalks, invisible to the city he had once protected. That morning, a probation officer had driven him to court. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Each step on the polished floor of the courtroom reminded him of the distance he had traveled from the battlefields to the public benches. He felt eyes fixed on him, some with disdain, others with curiosity. But he wasn't afraid. After all, he had weathered far greater storms. His name echoed through the room, and he slowly raised his eyes, surprising all those who saw him as nothing more than a homeless man. Colonel James Richardson, the judge pronounced the name with a mixture of respect and astonishment. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room, then everyone rose, almost instinctively. Memories of his heroic actions, secret missions, and sacrifices seemed to hang in the air, reminding everyone that the ragged man was not just a citizen in trouble, but a true, forgotten hero. James took a deep breath. He knew this hearing would be unlike any other. On this day, he would not only defend himself against the accusations against him, he would show everyone that a man's worth is not measured by his appearance or his current situation, but by what he has been and what he can still offer. The judge struck the gavel again, calling the trial to order. James sat down in the dock, his hands clasped in his lap. His lawyer, an idealistic young man named Michael Harper, gave him a reassuring look. "Mr. Richardson, are you ready to present your defense?" asked the judge, his voice firm but respectful. Before James could respond, a woman stepped forward from the audience. It was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a former comrade of James's from high-risk missions in Iraq. She was wearing a reserve uniform and carrying a thick file. "Your Honor, if I may," she began. The room fell silent instantly. "I have known this man for over 10 years. I can attest to his courage, his integrity, and his incredible sacrifices for this country." Every word she spoke seemed to erase the prejudices people had held. The spectators leaned forward, fascinated. The journalists scribbled frantically in their notebooks. James, surprised but moved, felt a surge of warmth rise in his chest. Someone remembered who he truly was. Michael Harper then rose to his feet. "Your Honor, we will request that the circumstances of my client's life be taken into account. James Richardson is not just a veteran, he is a man broken by the system that was supposed to protect him." The judge nodded, visibly impressed. "Very well. We will examine the facts and hear all the testimonies." As the hearing resumed, James observed the courtroom. He saw the expressions change, from pity to admiration, from indifference to curiosity. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. And he knew that this trial, which at first seemed a mere legal formality, would soon reveal truths no one could have imagined. As the trial progressed, the prosecutor called his first witness. James felt a strange tension fill the courtroom. He knew this trial would not only address his current difficulties, but also reveal long-kept secrets. The witness entered, Sergeant David Collins, a former member of his unit. He approached the microphone, his hands trembling. The room fell silent. I've known James Richardson since our missions in Iraq, Collins began, his voice hesitant. What most people don't know is that James saved the lives of dozens of soldiers and civilians in situations that no one here could even imagine. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some journalists looked up, intrigued. Collins then produced a military file he had kept secret all these years. He opened it slowly and showed photographs, mission reports, and letters of appreciation signed by high-ranking officers. Each document testified to courage, brilliant strategy, and enormous personal sacrifices. He was injured multiple times, and yet he kept coming back to the field, again and again, Collins continued. And when he returned to the United States, he received very little help. The bureaucracy let him down. James felt his eyes well up. The spectators, who had seen him as a simple homeless man just minutes before, were now stunned. The judge frowned, unable to hide his astonishment. Even the prosecutor seemed unsettled. Michael Harper rose and, in a firm but respectful voice, added, "Your Honor, I think it is clear that Mr. Richardson's situation is not a choice, but the result of extraordinary sacrifices and a system that has abandoned him." The entire room held its breath. James knew this moment was crucial. The past they had tried to erase might finally give him a chance at justice. As the courtroom caught its breath after Sergeant Collins's harrowing testimony, a side door suddenly opened. An elegant woman with neatly tied-back gray hair stepped forward confidently. She was accompanied by 2 assistants and carried a thick folder under her arm. "Your Honor, I am Colonel Margaret Williams, and I wish to give a personal testimony on the character and service of Mr. Richardson," she said in a clear and firm voice. James' eyes widened. He had known Margaret since the military base, but he never imagined she would show up in a courtroom after all these years. She approached the microphone and opened her file. During a critical mission in Iraq, James made the decision to risk his own life to protect an entire village of innocent civilians. This action was largely ignored by official reports, but it saved dozens of lives. A photograph was projected onto the screen behind her, James, in uniform, surrounded by civilians, a ruined village behind him. The entire room remained silent, shocked by the image and the story it told. Margaret then held up a sealed letter and handed it to the judge. "This letter is from the Secretary of Defense. It officially recognizes Mr. Richardson's heroic actions and highlights the lack of support he received after his return." The judge took the letter with an expression of mixed respect and disbelief. The spectators, the journalists, and even the prosecutor remained frozen. They all realized that the man they saw in rags was not an ordinary criminal, but a forgotten hero. James felt an intense emotion wash over him. After years of being forgotten and ignored, his past was finally coming back to defend him. But he also knew that this revelation would disrupt far more than just the trial. It would shake lives, reputations, and even the very perception of what a true hero is. As the judge examined the letter and documents presented by Colonel Margaret Williams, a murmur rippled through the room. Journalists scribbled feverishly, spectators whispered amongst themselves, and the atmosphere seemed charged with electricity. Suddenly, an old man sitting at the back of the room stood up. He was small, but his voice carried with surprising authority. "Your Honor, I am Thomas Green, a former neighbor and veterans volunteer. I wish to testify about the person James Richardson truly is." James' eyes filled with emotion. For how many years had these small acts of compassion gone unnoticed? Thomas recounted how, despite his own difficulties, James had always found a way to help others without expecting anything in return. He spoke of nights spent warming homeless people, meals shared with families in need, and letters of support he had sent to wounded soldiers. Each story seemed to shake the very foundations of people's perception of him. A young woman, seated in the audience, then stood up. She was a psychology student and had met James when he guided her after an accident on campus. He helped me without ever asking my name, she said, her eyes welling with tears. That man has a huge heart. To see him like this, it's unfair. With each testimony, prejudices crumbled. Murmurs turned into respectful silence. The prosecutor seemed unsettled, the jurors exchanged astonished glances, and the judge, visibly moved, sat up straight. For the first time in a long time, James Richardson did not feel alone. The entire room, from former comrades to strangers who had judged him too quickly, finally recognized the truth. Behind those worn clothes was a man of inestimable value. The judge tapped his gavel gently. We will now hear the defense. James took a deep breath. The moment he had been waiting for years was approaching. Justice would no longer be satisfied with appearances. The prosecutor finally rose, his face grave but resolute. He had remained silent until now, letting the testimonies of James's heroic past and the public statements resonate in the courtroom. Now he knew he had to make one last argument to preserve what he believed to be the rigor of the law. Your Honor, I understand that Mr. Richardson has performed heroic acts, he began, his voice measured but firm. But he is here on specific charges, and these facts cannot be ignored. We must consider the law before emotion. James listened calmly, his hands clasped in his lap. He knew this argument was expected, but he had something more powerful to reveal. Michael Harper stood up, a discreet smile on his lips. Your Honor, before we conclude, we have one last testimony to present. A young woman entered the room, carrying a tablet displaying videos and recordings. I'm Emily Sanders, a Veterans Services Analyst, she said. I've compiled evidence of Mr. Richardson's years of service, but also of the consequences of his abandonment by the system. She released a video showing James, after returning from the front, trying to navigate a Kafkaesque bureaucratic system to obtain medical care and housing. He was seen writing letters, visiting offices, confronting bureaucracy, and failing every time. His heroic efforts had been ignored. Silence fell over the room. Even the prosecutor looked away, unable to deny the overwhelming evidence. The man they had tried for minor offenses was not guilty by choice, but by systemic negligence. The judge, deeply moved, gently tapped his gavel. It is clear that we must reassess Mr. Richardson's situation in light of these revelations. Justice cannot be limited to appearances or formalities. James felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. After years of injustice, the truth was finally beginning to prevail. But he knew that the decisive moment, the moment when the entire room would decide his fate, had not yet arrived. The judge took a deep breath and rose slowly. The courtroom, now hanging on his every word, held its breath. Everyone present knew that the decisive moment had arrived. After hearing the testimonies, examining the evidence, and considering Mr. Richardson's background, he began in a grave voice, "It is clear that this man is not just an ordinary citizen, but a hero whom our system has failed." An electric silence filled the room. The journalist sat up, the spectators shuddered, and the prosecutor, although surprised, remained motionless. Consequently, the court decides that all charges against Colonel James Richardson are withdrawn immediately. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Then, like a wave, everyone rose to their feet. The jurors, the public, even some of the officers present in the room stood up, finally recognizing the man James truly was. James sat for a moment, unable to believe what he had just heard. The years of humiliation and oblivion seemed to vanish in an instant. The applause, the admiring glances, and the sincere smiles of the witnesses and spectators pierced straight to his heart. Michael Harper approached him, his eyes shining with pride. "You earned it, Colonel," he murmured. James took a deep breath, his heart swelling with emotion. That day, he had not only regained his dignity, he had reminded the world that courage and sacrifice are never invisible, even if society sometimes tries to ignore them. The judge struck his gavel one last time, but this time it was not a formal gesture. It was a silent tribute to a man they had all just rediscovered, standing among them, finally recognized for what he was, a true hero. After the judge's landmark decision, James Richardson left the courtroom to thunderous applause. Spectators and journalists crowded near the exit, some wanting to shake his hand, others simply wanting to capture the moment with their cameras. For the first time in years, James felt seen, heard, and respected. Outside, Michael Harper patted him on the shoulder. "Colonel, we now need to think about what comes next. You can't stay in the street. There are people ready to help you." James nodded, a slight hesitation in his eyes. He had spent so many years surviving rather than living that the idea of rebuilding his life seemed almost unreal. But he knew he couldn't ignore this opportunity. Shortly after, he received an unexpected call. A Veterans Foundation had followed his trial and wanted to help him find new housing, psychological support, and employment suited to his skills. Another organization even offered him speaking opportunities to share his experience, inspire young people, and raise awareness of the sacrifices made by military personnel. James spent his first few days thinking about what he really wanted. He realized that his true mission did not end with the war, it continued in the civilian world, where he could help those whom life had forgotten, just as he had been forgotten. One evening, sitting on the balcony of his new apartment, gazing at the city lights, James felt a mixture of emotion and determination. After everything he had been through, he knew the road ahead would be long, but he was ready to take it. This victory in court was not just the end of an ordeal, but the beginning of a new chapter, filled with possibilities and a reconnection with the life he had long thought lost. In the weeks following the trial, James Richardson quickly became an iconic figure. The media recounted his story, highlighting the courage and sacrifices of a forgotten veteran. But James didn't want his name to be just a symbol of personal victory, he wanted it to be an instrument of change. He began working with several organizations for homeless veterans. Every morning, he went to shelters, listening to the stories of those who, like him, had been left behind. He shared his experiences, giving advice, providing moral support, and above all, restoring hope. One day, he met Marcus Williams, a young veteran who had recently arrived in the city, broken by the war and despair. James took him under his wing, helping him find housing, a job, and above all, regain his dignity. "You're not alone, Marcus," he told him one evening, after a long day of paperwork. "We've all been through hell, but there's always a way out." Meanwhile, James accepted invitations to speak at schools and universities. Each talk began with his personal story, from war hero to homeless, then to a man recognized by the justice system and society. The students, often silent at first, were moved by the sincerity of his account and the courage he had shown in continuing to move forward despite everything. Little by little, James understood that his role went beyond simply rebuilding his own life. He was becoming a bridge between those who had served and society, a living symbol of resilience and justice. And in every smile he regained, in every life he helped rebuild, James rediscovered a little of the dignity and honor that had been denied him for so many years. A few months after the trial, James Richardson had become a familiar face in the city. Former comrades, journalists, and even civilians who had followed his story often came to greet him, demonstrating a deep respect. But for James, what mattered most was not public recognition, but the inner peace he had finally regained. One morning, he received an unexpected invitation. The mayor of the city wanted to meet him to congratulate him on his commitment to the veterans. During this meeting, James was honored for his actions, but above all, he was recognized for his ability to transform adversity into hope for others. As he left the town hall, he caught the eye of Marcus, the young veteran he had helped. The two men exchanged a knowing smile, a silence heavy with gratitude and respect. James understood then that his personal struggle had created a snowball effect. Every life he touched now carried his light. That evening, sitting on the porch of his apartment, James watched the sunset. Each shade of red and gold seemed to reflect his own journey, from war to the streets, and then to redemption. He was no longer just a veteran or a homeless person, he was a living symbol of courage, resilience, and regained dignity. For the first time in years, he smiled fully, knowing that, no matter what trials lay ahead, he had proven an essential truth. A man's worth is not measured by what society has given him, but by what he has managed to keep noble within himself. And in this city, from now on, the name James Richardson resonated not as that of a forgotten homeless man, but as that of a hero, finally recognized and celebrated for what he had always remained, a man of honor.